Yo, boys, welcome back. So, most of the time we like to pretend like we're big shots on our own show. You know, it's my name on the door, bro. But we're super excited to have kind of, I would say, a peer, also a competitor, also a leader in the form of amateurs turned professionals in political prediction. Logan Phillips from Race to the White House is joining us here today. Some of you already know Logan. Some of you may not know him quite so well. You certainly should. We will sort of get into his forecasting business, his forecasting models, and of course what normal people like us can learn about political prediction from someone who's doing it full time and has gone from armchair quarterback to professional. How do you feel about being characterized as a professional political predictor, Logan?
It feels good. And I would say that that's a fair take on how it got started, right? I used to make these predictions on the side out of this campaign management class I had in grad school. And I just took a pro started to try to take a pro when the pandemic hit. I was in New York City and desperately needed to channel my energy into something when everything shut down and eventually start to build a following.
So you've basically cocooned in a couple of years from boring random grad student to political predictor, receiving millions of views on your website and competing with the best, whether it's like Nate Silver or RCP or whoever. You are now in the room in the Hall of Champions.
I appreciate the intro.
That's all right. That's all right. But I don't think I'm exaggerating. Before we were recording, you were telling me that this is your full-time job. You've created a business. I've been on your website. It's it always surprises me how dynamic it is. I mean, it's visual, it's interactive. It's a true resource that our traders should be aware of. So why don't you tell them about Race to the White House, and then we'll sort of ask you some questions about the things everyone's thinking about on the precipice of an election.
Yeah, I think there's two big things that have been key to its success, right? One appeals more to your audience. One is probably a little more important to the business, but both are important. First, I try to make it as accessible to anyone, right? It's not just about having high quality predictions that builds you credibility, but it's making it easy for people to understand. And so my goal is if you pay this much attention to politics, if you come to the site within 5 minutes or 2 minutes, you're going to know what's going on in democracy and know what's in play. And then for the folks that are more your viewers, I try to go deeper than anyone else too at the same time with each state race. So it's you may or may not agree with my predictions, but you're going to get more data there than you get anywhere else. From the details in the fundraising to what's the partisan lean of the state in the electoral history to literally polling averages for all the key races showing how the voters are doing with different demographics, from white college educated voters to Latino voters, to young voters to old voters, right? And so it's this will give you the tools to get your own read on what's going on and see how the race is moving day to day.
So I guess you sort of halfway answered the first question that if I, just a random person walking on the street, would want to know is I'm used to going to 538. Everyone has a huge nerd boner for Nate Silver. We love to hate on him. He's fun to throw, Rotten Tomatoes out. But at the end of the day, he is Nate Silver. So why are you different from what he's cooking up over there at 538?
Yeah, I would say that I'm a lot more, in some ways, what Nate Silver used to do. And I respect Nate Silver. I'm not here to knock him because that'd be pretty hypocritical of me, right? I'm just setting everyone else up to criticize me in the same way. So got to be consistent here. But Silver used to give a lot more detail on how he came to his forecast. Now you're really just dealing with the top line. I've tried to do the same thing, but to a greater extent. And I've also been pretty competitive with him. I was better in the Senate last year. I got closer to the margin of victory on average, to better in Georgia, same total accuracy in calling races, right? And we also do all these weird races too. We did primary forecasts for the major primaries. We got all of those right in the Senate too. So you get kind of a different look on our site.
So the question that everyone wants to know, or at least everyone who cares wants to know, is what matters. And you ask 5 people who are betting on politics, they'll probably give you 5 different answers. So I guess I would ask you, what actually matters in political prediction? Or have there been things in your time that you discovered the hard way, didn't matter? That fundraising number or that pollster or something like that actually has no bearing on the outcome. Do you have a short list of what matters?
I would say I'm going to answer this first, less in the specifics and the larger purpose. I would say that if you have a hypothesis about how you can predict elections, if you're willing to do the hard work and test it in past cycles, you're going to be a lot more right and you're going to have specifics. And I think that's how you succeed, right? So I have thought things might be predictive and they aren't. And I've tested on 50 years worth of data, which admittedly that's hundreds of hours to put together. And that's not a reasonable thing to ask people to do. But I found it didn't work instead and moved on to something else. For example, I found one that did work, approval ratings early on, a little less so
Yeah.
at this point, unless you're dealing with a race like in North Dakota that has no polling. Although that weirdly does this year. Like you'll see that like, okay, like Ron Johnson, even though he's actually doing pretty well right now, had a very low approval rating that suggested he was vulnerable, might be primed to underperform.
Okay, so scraping the earwax out of my cavities, pay attention to approval ratings. You're stopping short of saying that all polls are fake, which is a common meme. But I do think it's interesting that you show how you weight your polls. And everyone's favorite pollster to hate on, what's his face at Trafalgar, Robert Cahaley, who we recently had on the show. I noticed that you give him as much weight as the people who are supposedly not fake and reliable and whatever, whoever it is the internet likes.
Yeah, well, sometimes you don't want to make the same mistakes twice, and I'm not sure if I'm overcorrecting, but I underrated Trafalgar last time and it did cost me. And I have a lot of skepticism about Trafalgar, but I also have to recognize that in 2 of the last 3 cycles, they've done well. They do have a unique approach to how they find voters, and you can arguably very justifiably use this as a way to attack their credibility or to boost it, because the other side is like the idea of a polling average, right? Is you have all these different pollsters that are taking different approaches to solving incredibly tough problems. There's arguably some merit to having someone that's doing something out of left field that works sometimes and not all the times. Maybe it ends up finding something, see more pollsters move towards him, and maybe it's a disaster, right? But given that he's had a strong record the past 2 times, I do correct for his bias, just like I do with every pollster. But I think he belongs in the weight, and if he has an awful year, he'll have less weight next year.
Okay, so pollsters, I would just love for someone to be able to tell me like this guy has it and this guy doesn't. But I mean, is that just like, do I need 50 years of data to in a model to calculate 15,000 different scenarios off of different permutations of those 50 years of data, or is there like a quick way to just sort of eyeball this stuff if you're doing this nights and weekends?
Yeah, there's no easy answer to this.
Bummer.
Yeah, I mean, I would say 538 pollster grade's a pretty good place to start, but they're probably a little bit too long tails in terms of how they assess the pollsters. They're dealing just with, I'm sure you guys talk this all the time, so I don't necessarily have to go too deep, but pollsters are just dealing with incredibly tough problem. Response rates are at the bottom, and we don't know yet what was causing these polling issues in 2020. We have a better idea on 2016 with the white college educated voters. The thing is, the pollsters it's part of capitalism, right? They have a desperate need to improve their record to make more money. They are doing their damn best to get it better.
Yeah.
And that makes it even harder for us because we can't rule out that they're going to miss to the left this time because they're overcorrecting for their mistakes. Because from a financial standpoint, it's true for forecasters too. You're way better off having a miss to the left this time around, underrating Dems than underrating Republicans, right? So, we saw in special election they underrated them. I wouldn't predict they're going to underrate Dems. I just wouldn't rule it out.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you one more question about the general, and then I'll shut up and let you and Pratik talk some. But when are polls predictive? So this is like a constant conversation we have, which is when do we like draw a line in the sand and say like this is when these metrics start to matter, and it's not just fluff from August when everyone's unplugged or a year before. Like, is there a point at which you really believe the numbers start to be predictive versus just something for people to talk about and put in fundraising emails?
I would say more than a year and a half out, they're very useful.
Yeah.
Do not treat them like the gospel. Well, every single day polls become a higher weight in my forecast, but they're like 30%. Even I started my forecast ridiculously early. That's a big part of why I was able to stand out last time.
Yeah.
But a year and a half out, they still have predictive value. Ignore presidential ones this early unless people know both candidates. Like if it's Pete Buttigieg versus Trump, ignore that. If it's Biden versus Trump, you can give it a minor amount of value. But for Senate races, a year and a half out, you're fine to
So like project that onto one Senate race. Please explain to me what is going on in the state of Ohio, where, on every kind of baseline thing, you would say this should be JD Vance's, that he should just walk straight into the White House. The polls are always fake there. They always miss by a ton. And yet, like, we don't see any evidence that JD Vance is separating or, breaking into a lead over Tim Ryan.
I would say, watch Mitch McConnell closely if you're someone that's skeptical of the polls. It sounds like you're more so than I am. I have a healthy dose of skepticism with Ohio polls. They've had some big misses.
Yeah.
It's harder to tell because some of these polls are showing Trump or voters that supported Trump by 8 points and want to support Trump by 10 points. Then they show Ryan up 1, and they show, DeWine up by 20. So it's like, this doesn't really seem like a biased poll outside of that portion, but it could be. I can't tell you for sure. But Mitch McConnell is taking this election deadly seriously. He spent more money in this state than any but 2 races.
Yeah.
And so he could be wrong. He's been wrong before, but he's pretty
Yeah.
damn good at assessing races, and he thinks it's one of the most competitive.
Yeah, yeah, right there. Like great metric. Boys listening, just look where the what is it? Is it the Senate Leadership Fund? What's his
Senate
feedback?
Leadership Fund.
Yeah,
And I
look where
trust
the
his instincts more than I trust Rick Scott's on assessing the political atmosphere, given that Rick Scott keeps killing his party with putting some of the most unpopular parts of the Republican platform front and center all the time.
true, true. Like for example, if you're watching the new Game of Thrones, like Mitch McConnell would be like a Tywin Lannister. Like he just
Absolutely.
understands power, and maybe he doesn't understand humanity quite as well, but he just knows where power is.
That's a fair assessment. I don't know, maybe Rick Scott's like Robert Baratheon. He seems pretty clueless about what's going on sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Rick Scott knows how to make money in the healthcare industry, but sometimes his political instincts are maybe leave something to be desired. All right, I'll shut up. Pratik, do you want to let me catch my breath here, or should we keep going?
Yeah, sure. Well, you mentioned that this project kind of dates back to your graduate school years, and I'm interested in the question. One of the things that I think our community is distinguished by is that we come from all different professional backgrounds, but when it comes time to actually placing bets and making predictions, we're willing to do the work and learn what we need to get better at this. I think that this question of what are the traits or education or background that's required to be good at prediction, I think there are a few different answers that have been offered. I think Tetlock in his book comes up with a number of different traits. I think Nate Silver really leans pretty heavily into the statistician, quant side of things. Your background is very interesting. You've done work in politics. You did a master's degree in IR. You have some digital marketing experience. What do you think are what is a good knowledge or skill set to really lean into to get better at this, and how do you use the different facets of your background to ultimately perform pretty well at predictions and forecasting?
I think that there are probably three things to me that seem really important. One, thinking creatively, right? You don't want to do what everyone else is doing, even if what they're doing is fine and very effective, especially if you're doing prediction markets, because you want to break from the conventional wisdom, right? Your goal is to see where other people are wrong, what angle they're missing, right? I was talking to someone else that does forecasting, and they found recently, for example, that age is an incredibly useful predictor to find which challengers in the House are going to over or underperform. I'm trying to squeeze enough time to potentially add that to my model in the closing weeks, because I have a few years worth of data to test it on now. Right? So it's like that type of original thinking will make you do better. For me, for example, this is less relevant now, but I did candidate quality back in the primaries, right? I had a primary model that said Mastriano is this likely to win. He's never run for office, or no, he hasn't run. He's running as state senator. I'm sorry. He has no fundraising. He's seen as pretty extreme. This is a guy who's likely to underperform if he wins the nomination. So I was lower on Republicans in Pennsylvania, and that's kind of how it's played out, for example. So yeah, creative thinking is huge. I would say the second is diligence. It is not necessarily fun to test your data on past election cycles, but you got to do it if you want to get it right, right? It is really easy to just try it on 2020, but that's actually setting you up for failure way more than a normal approach, because unless we have a historic polling miss, using 2020 is going to be wrong, right? That's like using 1990 or 1948 as your system when Harry Truman was wildly underrated by the polls, and 4 years later, Eisenhower was rated by the polls in the same way, right? You have the famous Dewey beat Truman newspaper where Truman had won the presidential election. The poll said he was going to lose by so much that a newspaper published their headline anyway, just assuming he was going to lose. And Truman's holding up in his reelection celebration party. And the next year, the last poll we had by Gallup showed Eisenhower only winning by 3. Eisenhower actually won by double digits, right? You can just mess yourself up when you're using a year where everything went wrong. So try it on past cycles. 2020 should be part of it. You should increase the chance that you're wrong in the uncertainty of your models because of past misses, but don't assume it's going to happen. Otherwise, you're going to look really bad. And if you're betting money, you're going to lose a lot of money if you get a little bit unlucky. Then the third thing I would say that's critically important is be humble. You are going to get things wrong, and you need to assume that and attack your assumptions relentlessly. And think about, if I'm wrong, what is the number one reason that I'm wrong, and try to break down from there and see if you can do anything that will improve your assessments as a result.
Well, what is the number one thing, if there is one, where you tend to err?
I would say that I had too little uncertainty last time. Ironically, despite what I was saying, I think I thought 2016 was too much of a aberration, and I wanted to go I bended my results too much to fit history. And that is the downside of testing in the past, is your goal here is not to predict past elections. That's what I did in 2020, essentially, right? And that did help me fine tune some things in terms of getting my projection closer, but it made me give like way too high odds to certain situations that were not realistic. And now I think I've learned that, look, we can't predict things perfectly within every data point, right, to know exactly how voters are going to go forward. But we have to sometimes call some audibles and take some risk, because it's not going to always perfectly align with the past, and politics does change. History will give you a great understanding of what's happening in the future, but history doesn't repeat itself perfectly.
Go ahead, Pratik.
Oh, if I were to say where I tend to get things wrong and answer that question, I would say at least historically it has probably come from putting too much weight on polling. Now, I am sufficiently satisfied from the last couple election cycles that I think Robert Cahaly is correct, at least in the sense that old methodologies of polling need to take a harder look, and even if they don't fail all the time, there are certainly cases where they fail. I guess the way that I'm dealing with that is that I'm taking qualitative factors a bit more seriously, and I'm also just allowing for a bit more variation. But can you talk generally on the topic of how should we think about polling? Like, should we view it as just one barometer now that is a little bit less accurate, or do you think that pollsters are genuinely learning and figuring out what went wrong, or how do you think about that question?
Yeah, I think that pollsters need to get better because it's their business model and they're likely to improve as a result. I think a healthy dose of skepticism is absolutely essential these days with pollsters, but they're still the best metric we have, in my view, if you're just going to use one, maybe that and partisan lean combined. How state votes relative to the national vote. So like if, you look at Biden, if it's a +8 Biden state and Biden won by 4 nationally, okay, you treat that as like a +4. Not that you only use 1 year to determine partisan lean, but that's kind of the basis of it, right? So I would say those two combined give you a good read on what's going to happen. I think it's pretty clear that JD Vance and Tim Ryan is going to be a lot closer than the House vote in Ohio will be, or the governor, right? And I think the polling is enough to bet on. We just don't know if it's going to miss and how much. I'd say chances are Ohio's going to miss to the right, but I wouldn't count Ryan out completely, for example. But the thing on Cahaly that makes me very confused, though, is his polling just seems way all over the place when it comes to being away from what all the other metrics would suggest. Every time he seems to be in a safe Democratic state, like in New York, and we get like a +R7 or a +D7 poll or D5, and then we have Pennsylvania where that seems a little more realistic, where it's like D2, or like Nevada where it's like R+2, R+3. I just don't understand how in these safe D states he's getting these numbers where they're 15 points off from what we would expect if we didn't have any polling. And that's made me a little bit skeptical to wonder if maybe, he is clearly a little bit more on the partisan side, the way he talks about things and tweets. I'm wondering if he wants people to invest in these candidates that he likes more. Now, I'm not putting that in my model because he had a good record in 2020 and 2016, even if it was bad in 18. And so I am giving him the benefit of the doubt. But just on a personal level, he's raised my skepticism because of those safety poll states. Just seem wild to me, consistently wild.
I feel like there's literally nothing I could say that, like, I feel like I'd be punching a hole in the Mona Lisa to keep talking. But Pratik, I see you.
Yeah, well, look,
I'm in awe.
I'll ask you the question I also asked Robert Cahaly. If we're acknowledging now that there's real uncertainty around polling, what is your view on prediction markets? I mean, how do you factor those into your forecasting? How do you think that how reliable do you think they are vis-a-vis polling and other forecasting mechanisms? And what are your thoughts generally on how prediction markets might be a potential answer or complement to some of these questions?
I think it's a little bit dangerous for forecasters to use prediction markets because prediction markets are fed by forecasts. And so now we're in a cyclical relationship where we're strengthening each other. I don't think the feed should go both ways. Otherwise, it's going to mess them both up. Are there some value in them? Sure. They did pretty well, but part of it is like you have to understand with systems of any kind, what are the people involved in them want? What are their biases? How do they think? Right. And so that's going to help you potentially understand where they might be over and underestimating things. And if you look at the prediction markets in particular, they wildly underrated Dems in the Senate early on, up until Nate Silver's forecast came out, right? They gave Republicans like a 70% chance, and that was just not where the map was. You could say, okay, pre-Roe v. Wade especially, but even after, maybe you would think like Republicans are going to win the cycle of popular vote, and that's probably a probability. But Republicans have failed to keep almost any of their competitive races incumbents running again outside of Ron Johnson, and if you want to include Florida in there, Rubio. Where Dems have got all the incumbents to run again, they had a better map this cycle. Democrats are going to pay for it next cycle because they have a horrible map. So there were just so many obvious clues that they were wrong there. That you could say Republicans are favored, but it was not an overwhelming number even back then. And so I think it shows a sort of a Republican bias this year on a lot of these betting markets. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that Republicans are overrepresented in this group. It just means that, especially if you lost money, the misses, if you're trying to predict elections, are much traumatizing, right? Like in a very low scale of trauma, that like you could just be burned so badly that it's human nature to learn from your mistakes. And these betting markets haven't been around that long as far as I know. So you probably had 1 or 2 or 3 cycles worth of this where maybe you've been burnt 2 or 3 times. You're going to overlearn from that. It's just natural. That's the type of mistakes humans make all throughout human history. World War II, people were overlearning the mistakes of World War I and trying to be less aggressive and not overreacting to everything. Now let Hitler go and roughshod over Europe with minimal response, right? This is a different version of it.
And then we invaded Vietnam.
Exactly.
So.
American foreign policy is consistent over and underreaction to their biggest mistake last time. If you're betting on politics, you're going to probably instinctively overreacting on 2020. Now, maybe the same thing happens, but usually history doesn't rhyme so neatly as that.
So, I mean, do you think though, I just, first of all, every election result is obvious the second it's over. You're like, how, like if you didn't get it right, you're like, what a fucking idiot I was. But do you think, is it fair to say that there's just a lot of really mixed signals out there this time around?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of baffled in some of these places. I don't have much money in the markets right now because there's just like, I can't make sense of it at this juncture. So I'm just kind of staying out right now. Or is that just like a weenie talking who, doesn't have 50 years of data to synthesize returns against?
No, this is, look, I believe in having higher uncertainty in my model. It's why you'll see a lot of the competitive races. I usually give a much higher chance of an upset than some of the others because I think we should be cautious right now. There's a big chance for misses and the data is going in opposite directions.
Well, okay. So, but you sort of set it up early that you're, like, what are the assumptions you're not attacking when you make predictions? And because of all these mixed signals, I feel like there are a lot of people who are seeing what they want to see and calling for a huge, quote, red wave. I hate the terms red wave and blue wave. And I wish we could just stop calling political parties by their colors, but here we are. But anyway, I mean, there are a lot of people who are smart that are calling for a big red wave. There are a lot of people who are smart who are calling for like a big blue wave. I mean, what are they not thinking about when like really maybe we'll just have a kind of mixed result, sort of stalemate election or like what are the stories that are floating out there that people need to be able to balance to figure out what's going to happen?
Yeah, I think if you're taking for granted there's going to be a red or blue wave, you probably have your partisan lens on, and their data isn't there to back up that that's a probability either way. Red wave is more likely than blue wave because we're in a midterm, but Dems do have a narrow lead in the polls right now. It's about a point to half a point. So I think that the reason this got so unusual is Americans are obsessed with freedom, right? Every country has things that makes it special that define them. For us, it's freedom. And whenever the party in power restricts freedom, there is usually a big backlash. Woodrow Wilson had a big backlash after he restricted rights to free speech to criticize the government of World War I. Republicans aren't the party in power, so this is a unique moment, but the restriction of abortion rights, which have been around for 49 years, is firing people up. Between that and the efforts to overturn the election, makes people worried about other rights, like right to determine who your representative is. Whenever you think that's a fair point or not, that just has people concerned. And it's some of the voters that moved from Trump to Biden that were probably very vulnerable for Democrats to keep, but that all this stuff has helped harden their support. And so that's why we have a chance for having one of the very rare midterms where the party in power could potentially not lose too much or maybe even gain something, although that's certainly not my prediction. It's just not impossible, which is interesting.
So the portion of what you said that I would love to know the answer of, and someone will have to study it 50 years from now, is to what extent do voters view like Hollywood and big tech as appendages of the Democrats? Because, if they do, like if all their tweeting and, like asides to their friends about cancel culture or being censored or whatever, like if they do map that onto the Democratic Party, like that thesis gets hard, right? Or if they do see Joe Biden at the top of the ticket, like that thesis gets hard. And I personally am just really confused about who is at the top of the ticket in this election, especially when everything is being scored as a war on everything else. Like, oh my God, there's a black elf in the Lord of the Rings. Like, what are they going to do next? You know, and all of these questions seem to be getting mapped onto politics. But I'm not convinced yet that they are, you know, that's not just noise.
I think the people that care about that a lot were probably voting Republican anyway, and that's true for a lot of things of Dems too. But I do think that to see your point, I think that Dems' big weakness, right, relative to Republicans, is even if their politicians end up being very disciplined and there's not a big gap, Dems pay a price for what anyone in the country that's a Democratic supporter or that's a group aligned with Democrats and they do something crazy, that's going to fire up the Republican base and it's going to be used to move independents. Where Republicans, apart maybe because you have Trump recently who does have his gaffes, Democrats don't necessarily benefit from the same thing. Again, that might be just opportunity. They don't have to reach out for those types of stuff.
Yeah.
But that forever hurts Democrats. I think they get some advantages by those associations, but it also punishes them too.
Yeah, I mean, if you read Barry Weiss's Substack or something like that, you know, you would think it's Democrats that are taking away people's rights every day. But again, it's like, is that really that thick of a constituency? You know, are there? So I
only for the really political people. Most people aren't that political. If you're not that political, the abortion thing affects your life, and the election stuff might freak you out a little bit. You don't really thinking about what Hollywood's saying about black elves. I mean, like that's just. Not even on the planet of most people's day-to-day lives.
Well, but I mean, I would argue the opposite as someone who's from Hollywood is that like that culture leads America and everything is a reaction to that. And like, what are people doing? They're spending 4 hours a day swiping through TikToks and watching TV and binge watching Netflix content that like their reality is really set by this stuff. And, you know, politics is sort of a reaction to that and a few other things.
That's not a bad argument. I would say though that we're long past the days of 1950s where everyone was watching the same few channels. So what that reality looks like is so wildly different that having something cut across consistently enough that people care about it it's not that it doesn't happen. It's just rare of culture. Yeah. Where the abortion thing most certainly cut across everyone. As to the pandemic, there's some stuff that it's just in your face. You just can't ignore no matter who you are.
Yeah, well, I think we all sort of see what we want to see, and that sort of is the flaw of betting markets is like you just get a lot of money that clearly is based on what people expect. And I will say, I'll transition us back to that. Your numbers are, I would say they're a lot more skeptical than betting markets are about this sort of red wave thesis. But if you were to call a surprise, I promise not to ask you about Georgia or Pennsylvania, but the polls are what they are. But I'm just going to throw out, how about North Carolina, Colorado, and New Hampshire? If you were going to bet on a surprise come election day, do you like any of those for one or even remotely for an upset?
I would say of the three, North Carolina, I don't think there's going to be an upset in North Carolina, but I think that people are underrating the possibility. Beasley this is a very normal race. It's not getting that much attention because you have two reasonable candidates, but you know, Beasley's done a pretty good job in past elections, but is pretty extreme. Not these days on the anti-election stuff. I don't mean it like that. I mean, like he's just made some mistakes, I would say, tactically, which are probably values, honestly, more than tactics. Like he decided to adopt Lindsey Graham's abortion thing. And you see this, you sometimes wonder, like, where are these politicians in terms of their connections with people, right? Like this isn't the time where you should be bringing the issue that your opponent views as your number one weakness to the front, but he has, and that's given some openings. And so if people feel that bad is too extreme to represent them, and Beasley overperforms by 2 points, if the cycle ends up being D+1 or D+2, she's got a shot of winning. I'd give her like a 33% shot, where I think the betting markets probably have her around like 20 or so.
Yeah, it's 80-20 right now.
Yeah. Don Bolduc is a really weak candidate, in my view. He probably was the worst candidate Republicans could have chosen outside of Corey Lewandowski if he ran. It's not that I don't think he's done. It's just New Hampshire voters really love moderates. It's a New England thing. They like people that are going to break with the party, that are going to have moments where they're going to say like, "Oh, this is important enough to me that I need to stand up with stuff." And like when he's calling Sununu like a Chinese communist conspiracy or Chinese communist supporter, and saying he's funding the Saudis and terrorism and all this other stuff, it just sounds weird. It really turns off those types of voters. So could he win if Republicans have a big year? Yeah. But I think the betting market's probably more right on that one. I think O'Day is a terrific candidate. Colorado's probably going to be more competitive than maybe people expected going in, but he's up against a lot. I think Biden won it by like 12 or 13. That's just a really hard place to win right now.
Another spot that's a pretty lucrative place to be betting is the Trump impeachers and how many of them will still be left standing come January of 2023. Have you looked into David Valdeo and what's his face, Pratik, up in Washington State?
I forget the name of the guy in Washington State, but I think he's a done deal. I think he's got this basically.
Yeah, that was sort of my thought too. But Valdeo is, man, I lived in California for 8 years. I never know what's going on there. I just can't ever make sense of what's, the way that state's politics work. And I'm consistently wrong betting on it. So never take my advice on anything in California, boys. Like, have you looked into that, or is that?
Yeah, I'm pulling up my numbers on him right now. I think Valdeo is a little more likely to win than not, like 66% chance. I mean, this is a D+10 district, so it's not an easy place. People calculate that different ways. So let me put it like this, right? Like I expect it to be 10% more Democrat than Republican in a neutral cycle. So some people, for Cook, that might mean D+20.
Yeah.
But for me, that means like it's not as big, right? Just the margin I expect Dems to get above Republicans in a neutral cycle. So that's a really hard place to win. But Valdeo has really broken with Republicans hard by impeaching him, and it's not the only time. He's been more bipartisan, and it's like Democrats, to a degree, I think more so than Republicans, they're kind of thirsty to support the type of Republicans they want to see. That's why you have the most popular politicians in the country are Republicans in very blue states that break with those conventions. I don't know if you see Republicans feeling the same type of craving for Dems. And so you can see guys like Valdeo overperform. The problem for him is very staunch on abortion. And if it weren't for that, I think this would probably be a pretty clear choice. But that's going to be a deal breaker for some D-leaning independent voters. But I still think he wins. The polling suggests he's going to win. He has good fundraising. He has a great electoral history. I think he's a modest favorite. Maybe we'll win by 3.
Yeah, Newhouse is the other candidate.
Yeah. Pratik, if you want to keep going down this path, I'm happy to. But I did want to make sure, at your suggestion, frankly, that we reserve some time just to ask Logan a little bit about building an internet enterprise. I feel like that's an eminently relevant topic for anyone. If you can sell something on the internet, you can live a comfortable life. But do you want to wrap us up on the elections, or should we just go there?
Yeah, let's go there.
That?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I thought that was for me. My bad.
No. I mean, like, so everyone, like literally everyone is trying to be cool on TikTok or, get retweeted or something like that. I mean, you've literally built a business from, dust on your grad school, work desk to something that, as discussed, receives millions of views. Do you want to give any advice to anyone out there who wants to do the same? Like, how do you attract attention in such a crowded space?
I would say find something that you're doing that's different than everyone else and get your own website is a good way to do it, which is admittedly it's hard to get people off social media to do that, but you're not going to make that much money on TikTok. If I had these number of views on YouTube, well, maybe not on YouTube, but on Twitter, if I had millions of views on Twitter or millions of followers, which I don't, right? I have like 2,600 or something. It would not get me that much money because I don't get to take advantage of the ads, right? Ads are a way you make money. The other way you make money, you're getting people to donate. They really like what you're doing. And if they really like what you're doing and you have a smaller niche, you can probably make some money on the side, not enough to have a full business, but that can work. So in addition to having, your own platform, do something creative that's unique and try to get something that doesn't have as much search traffic or competition for the results, right? Because if you're on day one running against Politico, Washington Post, New York Times, it's really, really hard to break through.
Yeah. And so are you your own PR guy? Like, do you try and get your stuff placed, or did that just naturally happen? Did people just naturally start quoting you?
I literally just hired a media consultant because I'm finding that, even though I feel really good about the work we're doing, I'm new, right? It's my second year. And so getting press to cover me when they haven't met me personally is a little bit of a challenge, and I'm hoping to improve on that front. But beforehand, I spread a lot of it through social media. I got cited a few places like NBC and some local papers. But really social media is how I started to spread it. Got Google to take me seriously when they saw a lot of people coming and staying on the site. And then I just rose through the search rankings. And that's really where I get most of my viewers from.
Wow. SEO guy right here.
Do you find that your traffic varies quite a bit, like depending on the election cycle and all that? Or what do you do during kind of the off year to keep your numbers up?
Well, we are going to be going all in on the presidential primaries. That's where I cut my teeth. It's what I'm best at. So we already have our primary polling average and our 2024 national polling averages. And I'm going to build a primary model. It's going to launch earlier than most. And then, I did better than all opponents last. And it sounds so arrogant, but that's where I started race to the White House, is because I did in the 2020 primaries. So that's what I'm hoping to take advantage of. I'm sure I'll get less views in 2023 than I do now, but I'm just going to adapt to the niche, right? And go where the needs are. And There's often a lack of quality data on presidential primaries in the early stages, even when the interest is high. So I'm hoping to fill that need, and we'll see how it goes. In 2021, I didn't get many views, but to be honest, I didn't get many views in 2020 either. So that had more to, I can't tell if that was about the psycho or my business was at.
You never know. The internet's a weird place, but it's an exciting place when things work well.
Yeah, it is an interesting question. Like when I think the question that a lot of us have in the prediction market space, et cetera, is how much of a demand really is there for high quality political analysis? Because, one argument would be that there is a huge amount of interest in this when you talk about kind of the addiction we all have to following the horse race and the like. On the other hand, our politics are so tribal, and the vast majority of people go into politics and watch cable news and all that to scratch a certain partisan itch more so than weighing complicated data sets. And I mean, I think you can kind of argue both sides of this. I think it's incredible the kind of business and traction Nate Silver and 538 have developed. I mean, on the other hand, I think the quality of mainstream discourse continues to deteriorate, and I'm always shocked by how partisan and loose even political analysis is in mainstream reporting. So, like, I guess based on your project, what have you found in that respect, and are you more optimistic or pessimistic about the forecasting space?
I think that my goal is to not just have, it certainly would be useful for betting, but my goal is to provide a service that helps people understand what's going on in the democracy. So it's not just the fun of the predictions, right? And there might be some people, like I'm sure a decent size of maybe viewers that come there for that, but I just try to make it easy for people to understand what's going on. There are so many people these days. It's like, it comes from the tragedy of our politics being so broken, of people feeling that the other side wins. It's the end of the world, of politicians running on us versus them. And that's not a good thing, but the upside is it has more people engaged than ever. We had historic voting levels in 2018 and 2020. We saw historic levels of small dollar donations, and those are good forces in our system. And my view is, if you're donating hard-earned money, because everyone who works, we work hard, it's not easy, and you care enough to put it towards a race, I want to make sure you do it in the right place and you're doing it in the way that you're informed. Same thing with volunteering your time, which is always limited, right? And so if you come, like, my view is like, I don't want you to do it to, try to be Marjorie Taylor Greene in a race that isn't going to make a difference, right? You should do it in one that's actually competitive. And so I think if you come to places like my side and others, you'll be able to do it smartly. And you also be able to understand a really fucking weird political system, because, your vote sadly doesn't matter in some states nearly as much as it does in others. And, it's important for people to know where the power actually is, where places are going to influence things. And for most people, I'm sure for the average viewer, they know this like the back of their hand, but most people, they don't, right? And I hope to make it easier for them to get what's going on.
It's a pretty artful answer. I mean, my, now we're kind of going off the straight line a little bit. Like, I tell people that there's basically like 5 types of content, and unless you can do either tier 1 or tier 2, which is solving problems or providing exclusive information, like, you're really going to have a hard time building an audience. And I don't know, I'm just like very persuaded that is a product that people need, is something that just tells them what is actually going on. Like, forget what people are selling me, like what is actually going on, then how can I influence the outcome? And I feel like we should take the note, Pratik, like, Star Spangled Gamblers, we will start being more useful. Let's stop being so useless, Pratik. Can you help me do that? He's just smiling.
Something to think about.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll shut up. If anyone else has anything they want to say, I'll stop talking, and then we'll let Logan return back to his life of predicting elections better than the average bear.
Well, yeah, Logan, why don't you tell our viewers where they can find you, follow your work, all of that, and anything that you have planned. You mentioned the presidential primaries, but any other initiatives you have on the horizon?
Yeah. Hey, I appreciate that. So where you can go is racetothewh.com. And if you can't find that, just Google like 2022 Senate predictions or something like that. I'm usually on the first page or top 5 in Google searches. And what we have is coverage of every single race that is remotely competitive for the Senate, governor, and House races. For the House races, we do it by state. So hopefully if there's a race you care about and you want to learn more about, we'll be able to give you some good, unique, deep information on that. We will be going all in on the presidential primaries way before anyone else is. So if you want to know what's going on there, please go go and check it out. We also have an MLB forecast and NFL forecast too. And our MLB forecast just basically tied 538 in FanGraphs in our first year. Different parts of the year we were better. Other parts of the year they were better. And you can also follow me on Twitter. And I think it's Logan at r2h.com, or not .com, at Logan. Yeah, at Logan R2WH. And if you ever have any questions or want to talk politics, send me a PM or write to me at racetothewhitehouse@gmail.com. I'm always happy to talk shop with anyone.
Sounds like we need to book you for like a January 1st presidential primary podcast, New Year's Day, maybe a little hungover. Maybe not, but we'll be glad to go there with you when the time's right.
That would be fun. I'd love to do it. Got a wedding on New Year's, maybe January 2nd, but that would be great.
I'll just meet you at the bar after.
Sounds good.
All right, Logan Phillips, Race to the White House. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been too long coming, and we'll be following your work closely and with great admiration.
Thanks a lot, Alex. Great to talk to both of you guys. Have a good one.
Thank you.